Okay, so our next panel is Sustainable Local and National Public Transport Solutions. So I'd like to welcome to the stage Sylvia Barrett from the Campaign for Better Transport, Renee Perkins from City Mass, Iqbal Ahmed from DOT, and our moderator for today from the Sunday Times. Thank you very much for coming, Nicholas Helen.
Hi, welcome to the event. I think we've got quite a broad topic here about sustainability of public transport. One of the speakers hasn't been able to attend, so I think to try and give it some more dynamism, I might try and involve the audience a bit more, and it'd be really good with just a brief show of hands to see, are any of you actually practically involved in trying to use tech to improve transport? Do you mind just showing hands? Are any of you involved in actual practical things? That'd be really good, because it'd be good to involve you. Because I've just come back from the Tory Party conference literally this morning, and 2 or 3 things shine out. Number one, there's a rail strike on, so it was quite difficult getting back. And especially with younger audiences, they don't tend to think very much about things like trains and buses because they're not very exciting. But that causes massive disruption. Means everybody comes by car. There's a lot of money involved, so I sometimes have to remind people that at the moment the subsidy so far for the trains is about, in the past 2 years, been about £1,000 for every household. So that's a lot of money. Adds up to about £26 billion. And one sort of implication of that is that we all like to think public transport good, carbon emissions down. The downside, of course, is you're taking a lot of money away from other things. And then you have to start saying, is it actually worth it? And people tend not to answer that question. And the reason we're having strikes is because the government have decided that actually the costs are not sustainable. We have to cut the costs. RMT and ASLEF, TSSA have said, actually, no, we want to kind of get paid more. So there's a collision course there. And it's a big thing because it counts for a lot of transport. So I go to a lot of conferences involving tech people. They use big words like mobility as a service. Never quite understood what that meant, ever. And so it's good to, but I'm being deadly serious, so you'll get much more out of this if we can sort of pick on you. Because I'd say, again, it's worse than just looking at the realities. So yesterday, the last train out of Birmingham, which, trust me, lots of people are looking for, was 10:10 at night, and that gets in at 1 o'clock into Euston, which basically then means, what, 30, 40 quid taxi fare on the other side for lots of people. That's not really joined up. So I don't even laugh because it's too, when people talk about joined up and use of tech, no, it isn't happening. The timetables aren't even like that. And the big picture is that ever since the pandemic, passenger numbers have gone down. They've recovered quite a long way, but not far from the whole way. So there's a serious outstanding problem that most of those people have gone into cars. And you have to grapple with those big things. So bus numbers are about 80% what it was before. Trains were hovering around about 90%. That's a lot of people who are not using shared public transport. So let's start with Iqbal, who works for DOT and is going to tell us lots of exciting things, and then we'll work our way through and go on from there.
Hi, everyone. My name is Iqbal Ahmed. I'm the Public Policy Manager for UK and Ireland at DOT. We're a micromobility company operating shared e-bikes and e-scooters in about 45 plus cities across Europe and Israel. Here in London, we're one of 3 operators taking part in this e-scooter trial, and also have a fleet of e-bikes. So we have about close to 4,000 vehicles in London, doing from 4,000 to 6,000 rides per day, depending on weather, and rail strikes play a big part of that. And so fundamentally, micromobility is about solving I would call it an economic problem and maybe a physics problem. It's the fact that in a city like London, about half of all journey, or have a half world journey that use the car are under 5 miles. And of those, 25% are about 1 to 2 miles. Those are journeys that can be easily shifted to other modes. And what we're trying to do is provide a convenient, sustainable, and fast option. When it comes to urban transport, so I'm the local part, the local equation, and it's about making it as frictionless and as easy and as fast as possible. Public transport is really important for moving large quantities of people to hubs, but from those hubs, from Euston Station at 1 o'clock at night, we're trying to offer that last mile journey. That's there when you need it and where you need it. So it's not about waiting for a train. It's not about waiting on anything else, about availability. That when you get up somewhere, you can just, it's there waiting for you. You can take it where you want to go, and including that last mile part of the trip. We really see ourselves as expanding public transport, expanding the reach of public transport. The majority of our trips in user surveys actually join up with public transport. So not only do they end at transport hubs, but that's quite obvious because that's where people want to go given the way cities are planned. But we ask our users, was this trip done in conjunction with public transport? About, depending on the city, about 50 to 60% say, yes, we did this with public transport. Then the other side of it is obviously the private car. The big egg to crack in cities like London is how do you do mode shift? How do you take people from polluting, what I call like negative externality forms of transport, like car sharing, like driving your own car, to more sustainable forms of transit, like walking, cycling, scooters as well. Right now, those numbers are still a bit soft, still a bit new here. What we find in London, especially with scooters, in the early days, people would take scooters in big circles. There's a novelty of its fun, which I get. But since then, we've kind of evolved. Trips are becoming more during, most of our journeys now happen during commuting hours. So not about 8 a.m. and 5 to 6 p.m. And in our most recent survey, about 40 to 60% of our users said that since using our service, whether scooters or bikes, they're using car sharing less or not at all, and they're driving less or not at all. So, mode shift can be a bit difficult to measure sometimes because it's not a one-for-one comparison. Not all walking journeys are good, not all car journeys are bad, but those bad car journeys, the ones that are maybe 1 mile just to go to a transport hub, we're trying to move those away. But also not all walking journeys are good either. If you're a NHS nurse at 1 o'clock at night, having to walk home at, walk home for 40 minutes, that's a bad walking journey. You want to try to remove those and just make the, and I think what we try to do is just make the entire system a bit less, a bit less friction in the entire system, a bit more reach of public transport, and just make it a bit more efficient in our own sort of way.
Thank you very much. And then I think we have Sylvie from the Campaign for Better Transport.
Hello, my name is Subak Climate. I'm a Director of Policy and Research at Campaign for Better Transport. For those of you that don't know us, we're the national charity for championing greener ways to travel, ending from walking and cycling to public transport to shared mobility. I guess my starting point for today, just to respond to Nicholas' challenge, is that can we afford to keep subsidizing public transport? And my argument is that we can't afford not to. And let's not see it as a subsidy, let's see it as an investment. I'm sure you're all aware of the numbers in terms of what's involved in decarbonizing transport, what's involved in reaching net zero in transport. There's lots of studies out there now that show that just moving to electric vehicles alone is not enough. Just replacing all vehicles with EVs is not enough. We need to actually reduce how much we drive, reduce the overall vehicle kilometers. And to achieve that, there's some trip substitution, but also modal shift to other modes of transport. And public transport needs to play a vital role in that, alongside walking and cycling and shared mobility. The difficulty now is how do we deal with, how do we build public transport back up? Because the pandemic has really affected people's perception of public transport. And our argument is that the government's messaging at the start of the pandemic has really made people nervous about sharing, public transport with other people in terms of virus contamination and so on. But there's also been a lifestyle change, and some of that has been good. Obviously, more working from home and not traveling at all is beneficial in terms of saving vehicle kilometers. But what we've seen from the data is that car journeys are back to 100%, even more than pre-pandemic levels, whereas public transport is still at about 80 to 90%. While we don't want to ask people to be making unnecessary journeys, we need to be keeping the balance away from the private car towards public transport. What is the best way to do that? There's so many different factors involved. I'm aware that no matter how seamless and integrated a multimodal journey is, it will never compete with the A to B convenience of the private car if it's sitting in your drive and you want to make the most out of it. You want to, obviously you've invested in the car. The only way to sort of keep that balance towards other modes is to make the car slightly less convenient and public transport and other options much more convenient. So we're talking about significant reductions in public transport fares, cycle lanes, and I guess the cost of living crisis is a good point at which people can start thinking about what makes sense to them financially and what makes sense in their circumstances. So as well as major life choices. So for example, when a person moves house to a new town, the local authority can, reach out to them with public transport options, give them, 1 month free public transports to try out the local networks. But the reality is buses, trains are on their knees at the moment. The only way to prevent large scale cuts in buses, in rail frequency, is to continue investment in those options. Otherwise, so the government has implemented a £2 fare cap for buses, for example, that will come into effect in January. Well, what use is that to someone whose bus route has been cut and that's no longer there? People will, be pushed into buying cars even more, even if they don't have them at the moment. So that's my basic argument for today, and we can continue discussing the details of that.
So next up, Renee Perkins from City Mass, who's been telling me earlier what they get up to, and she's now going to tell you. Essentially, yeah, over to you. I won't steal your thunder.
Sorry. Yes, Renee Perkins here, CEO and co-founder of City Mass. It's great to be in these familiar places because I was City Mass was actually incubated in Microsoft in 2019, actually. Time flies, and so it's great to see familiar places. And what we do is that we help sectors and organizations such as public transportations and other sectors to be digitally inclusive. What that means is that we're helping their websites, online presence, to be accessible for people with disabilities. So for example, if you have dyslexia and you're trying to consume an article online, but you can't really understand it because the way the current 90% of the website, by the way, is not accessible for everybody, and it's not compliant with the standard called WCAG 2.1. So that's what we do. We use our technology, and we work with a team of disabled consultants to help audit websites against the standard called WCAG and make sure that the organization's online presence, like websites, it's accessible at the point of information dissemination. I.e., if you're trying to book a ticket from a trainline.com, if your website is not accessible, you basically deny access to that 15-20% world population. According to UN, there's 1.3 billion people with disabilities. That numbers might be debated, but that's point making is there's a lot of people require some sort of adjustment in order to be able to continue in the modern days of living, interacting online, and enable that kind of independent living. So my points here in public transportation subsidies and might have slightly different aspects of it, but I will leave the discussions in the hands of Nicholas.
Thank you very much. So I think what Renee raised there is very interesting because I want to be a bit provocative to the audience. We heard all of last week about the Facebook algorithm which killed Molly Russell. They had to be dragged to the coroner's court, or played a part in her suicide, should I say. What was fascinating when I was speaking to Renee earlier was you hear a lot from tech people that somehow they'll be critical of public bodies, their failings, lack of investment, etc. But we should maybe interrogate a bit more that figure, saying 90% of websites are inaccessible. But say a bit, if you could be a bit more granular into criticisms, ideally even which ones, where in plain terms you seem to be saying there are a lot of people who simply can't use the tech that these sort of people are responsible for. And that they've just not bothered to take account of it, whether it's because people have got sight visions problems, cognitive problems, dyspraxia problems, whatever.
So just put a bit of context, that 90% of the website, we actually scan over 1 million web pages against this standard called WCAG, and 90% of websites are not compliant with this standard. And there is a regulation called Web Accessibility Regulation 2019 to come into play to require all the public sectors to be compliant with this standard. And ongoing compliance, of course, because websites and online presence, you have new projects, new digital transformation, new content, etc. And that's the context where I came from in terms of 90% of the website is not compliant. Now, what's the reasons behind it, right? Apart from there is a regulations requirement for public sector, what about the rest of private sectors? What about the private sector supplying to the public sectors, right? There's a whole load of supply chains in order to be transformed into a more inclusive society. I hope I did touch a point that you mentioned.
Just one more question though. Give an example if you wouldn't mind. I mean, is this just at the edges, or are you saying that people simply can't book tickets?
Yes, for example, right, Louis, we know very well, and he's a wheelchair user, and he also have dexterity on hands, so he can't use mouse, for example. And our platform, Mobility Map, providing accessibility information on places so that they know so that he knows which places he can actually go and access the place, and which station is accessible for wheelchair users. For example, Moorgate is it, London Bridge is it, before he actually planned his journey. And then before he actually made the journey, he has to plan it. In order to plan it, how do you plan online? So you need information in order to plan the journey. And is your information accessible? If I can't move fast, I can't navigate through an assistive technology like Assist Me, which is one of our technologies, help them to navigate and understand information to plan it. You can't even start to even thinking about going out. So that's a real life example of a wheelchair user that would like to travel from A to B and the obstacles that you're facing and how we actually overcome that.
So I warned some of the panelists, they're going to be, just be put on their guard a bit. So I'll throw something at Sylvie, which people all nod along to the attack on the car. And then we all sort of think, yeah, good. But at the back of your mind, you kind of think, this is an economy which has been staggering along for a number of years. Productivity, not just here, but around the Western world, almost despite, and perhaps because of the rise of big tech, it almost coincides with the drop-off in productivity, doesn't it, for the last 15, 16 years? So isn't there something perverse about saying cars are so wonderful that you yourself said people want to go A to B, that we're going to throw some grit in the mix, slow everybody down, make them go on push bikes, scooters, etc., get them out of their nice, warm, beautifully engineered cars, and slow down the whole economy, where everybody nods to that side of it, but when it comes to the public services they want and the pay rises they want, we see how it unveils. So try and answer that, if you wouldn't mind.
I guess the challenge is that many people actually have been pushed into owning a car over many years. I mean, we've designed the system in such a way that cars are a preferred, more convenient, mode of transport in many cases, and it's just a cycle of decline in terms of public transport for many years that has been precipitated by obviously car makers' interests or other people's agenda. And the truth is that many people want to, get about without a car. There's many people that don't have an option but to rely on public transport. When it comes to people on low incomes, people with disabilities, older people, children going to school and college, Many people actually need public transport, but it has eroded to such an extent over time that it becomes a non-option, and people like that become isolated. We've done lots of research and examples. We hear from our supporters on a daily basis about how they've been affected by public transport cuts. There's moms not being able to take their kids to a playgroup. There's old people who have missed their hospital appointments and they need to wait months or even a year for another appointment. It's just everyday impacts of the cuts to public transport services. And that's on top of the decarbonization agenda that we're all working towards. It's just impossible to meet those targets in any other way. There's also public transport is good for economic development as well. So we've done research on left behind neighborhoods, which is basically areas on the outskirts of towns or in coastal towns, so former industrial towns that have high levels of unemployment because of a lack of public transport and people who can't afford to own a car and actually get a job. So we're perpetuating this cycle of reliance on benefits, people unable to find sustainable work. They can't even access a job center. So that's the sort of basic level of provision we need to make sure is available across the country. And in addition to other options like car clubs, for example. So I moved out of London to a coastal town about a year ago. We don't have a car, we still don't. But we're now considering buying one because there isn't a car club available for those odd journeys when we want to take the kids to a day trip, for example. Until local authorities, get their skates on and actually, invest and make sure that the alternatives are there, people will not be able to get rid of their third or second cars and buy new cars.
Iqbal's desperate to intervene. Let me just push you on one other question, though, because you didn't quite answer the economic one. In round figures, there's about 40 billion a year is raised on road duties, right? Fuel, etc., showroom tax, of which only about 30 or so of that goes towards general schools, hospitals, etc., only about 10 billion for the roads. Whereas, as I've set out earlier, we put a lot of money into various forms of public transport. So I get why we want public transport for the social goods you've been talking about, but are you basically telling us that when you say, which at least you're being honest, that you've got to make it harder for cars, isn't that actually just slamming the brakes on economic growth, which isn't a great thing when actually we're in big financial trouble?
No, so my point is that public transport does support growth as well. And as long as people have good economically viable options to get around without a car, that's inherently a good thing as well. The other side of the tax issue that you mentioned is that the switch to electric vehicles will actually drive those revenues down even further, because obviously electric vehicles don't pay fuel duty or vehicle excise duty. So we've been looking at making pay as you drive or road pricing, as some of the techies call it, a viable option. And for a long time, the politicians have been shying away for that issue because they feel that the public is not on board with it. But the research we have done shows that many people actually welcome it because current vehicle taxation is not transparent enough. Many people don't know how much tax they're paying actually when they're driving their car. So if you make that more transparent, people would actually, it would keep the balance in terms of pricing, and people would be thinking more about, how much driving costs them as opposed to public transport. So that's something that, needs to be considered seriously. And the government does invest billions in road building, which we know just increases traffic. So we cannot be, they're actually investing money into making the issue worse and making it basically more economical for people to drive and more attractive for people to use their car than public transport. So if we flip those priorities around, we need to looking at things the other way around and actually invest in the green options and less into car driving.
Thanks. I just wanted to jump in on the more local side of that because I like to say sometimes I'm I'm but a humble foot soldier in the war in cars. So really, it's. But I think there's a premise in that Sylvia kind of touched on, is that we do subsidize cars, right? That people who drive are not paying the full cost of driving. The environmental externalities, air quality, even if in an EV, you still have particulate matter. If people were truly paying the true cost of driving a city like London, a lot less people would drive. And I mean, this is, having worked on this topic pre-pandemic for a long time, people use public transport in London ostensibly subsidize the red routes in London people drive on. So I do think that what we need is a rethinking of having people pay the true cost of using their car. And by doing that, we can then nudge them on other forms of mobility. And one thing that we think about micromobility is unbundling the car, right? There's this economic problem here that you buy a car, high fixed cost, and it's going to sit in your driveway, not being used, but you're going to be drawn to it every time because you've already have that sunk cost. If you make everyone pay the true cost of every journey they make and unbundle it, then they're more likely to make smarter, more sustainable choices, right? So if you can live a lifestyle in which you have a car club for the journeys you need it, have an e-bike or scooter for the other journeys, and walk for the journeys you need, you can ostensibly then get rid of that sort of economic argument for a car because you're actually paying for the true cost of it, which I don't think people in London, we have, road pricing, congestion charging, which is good, but throughout the UK, we aren't doing that.
Can you quantify what you call the true cost? Because as I say, what you're up against is that motorists do pay about a 30 billion surplus each year on their road tax, fuel tax, etc., over and above what they get back in return. So even if it's just, if you've got it ready, work, but otherwise just tell me, what are the big ticket items you say are the true costs?
I don't have a number off the top of my head, but if you take the environmental impact of driving, the GHG, emissions, the particulate matter emissions, so air quality, even if you think about the time that people in our economy that is lost sitting in traffic, right? There are other costs of driving that are not just what you pay at the fuel pump and not what you pay at, in your road duties. So, if you're even pricing gas in the way that internalizes the environmental impacts, you have a behavioral change there. I mean, and we're here talking environment. So I would say the environment is the big ticket item there.
So why is it that we've got something called Airbnb, which is worth what, about 77 billion, something like that? Sharing economy, very difficult to sell when it started, the idea that somebody who could afford to go in a hotel would stay in the spare room. So why has none of that happened? We've got Uber, but why has none of this happened for private cars? Because the anti-car people will tell us repeatedly that the car sits on the driveway for 95% of the time. But why is this sort of audience not able to make people want to share their cars more? And ride sharing, why is that not happening?
Well, I don't think
if it's so obvious, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, I don't think ride sharing has become,
or lift sharing, to make the distinction as opposed to Uber, lift sharing.
But I think the ride sharing broadly is more just become, at higher taxis. I mean, the original pitch for ride sharing was that people who are going somewhere will pick someone up.
Sorry, I meant lift sharing because the big picture in Britain is that the occupancy rate in a car has dropped year by year in the UK. 65% of all journeys in cars are solo, just the driver. So I'm talking about the sort of thing which used to happen where people share a lift to work or whatever. Why is it we've had the whole tech revolution and almost nothing's happened? There's one firm called Lift Share, which is doing a valiant job, but anybody else? Anybody want to say something?
I guess, the critical barrier there is certainty and convenience. So people don't want to have to rely on an app to find someone to share their journey with on a daily basis. They like the convenience of having the car on their driveway, able to sort of go into it wherever they want, when they want. So if I have to find someone to share my ride to work every day, you either find someone that you stick with, but if you have to do it on a daily basis, can you imagine if I have to get an app out every day before I get out to work? So unless it's sort of much,
I think if you're nice to them, they probably come back the next day. That's the idea.
Yeah. But I mean, obviously,
do you want to contribute?
But and also you need critical mass in big cities.
I'd also like to add.
So you say your bit, and then we'll get some from the audience.
So I'd like to also add that the certainties and convenience and also the essential bits of functionalities, right? So for people with disabilities, you may require wheelchair accessible vehicles, etc. So there are various different considerations. And the other points I would like, and also on top of that is that, you need to know which car is available, when is it, where is it, and that's the information you require to make it more uncertain, make it more pleasurable, and make it more accessible, right? So make it all accessible for everybody, and also the technology investments on. There are a couple of startups I'm aware of actually trying to do that kind of private car sharing type of ventures, but where have they get to, right? I'm just simply putting questions out there. If the fundings from various different both public sectors, ventures, private sectors, into organizations and ventures that actually be able to provide a sustainable and accessible, inclusive transportation solutions and accelerate that. And there is a lot of uncertain elements of that, which we can discuss another time.
Let's have a couple of those, the chap at the back left, and then the one in the middle there.
Hi, so there is actually a BlaBlaCar is quite big in Europe, right? And yeah, it's loads of people use it in France. I'm based in France, and it's really popular and reliable. So I was just wondering, why hasn't it kind of taken off in London or, across the UK? And I don't know if it's a cultural thing, like the fact, I mean, I've driven so many people around, and I've gained, so many good relationships that actually I'm driving them again. And then you actually have that, you tackle that issue of reliability. So, maybe it's to do with, I don't know, it's a whole systems, right? It's like the individual needs. I want to be more of an individual kind of town here, or not town, city, right? Everyone's got their own kind of way to go, and like it doesn't meet with other people. So maybe it's more about a community perspective and changing that whole community, because there are people who want to help. It's just a lot of the time tech hasn't solved that, or maybe he hasn't solved in a particular location.
Do you want to get
the
guy waiting at the back as well? Just let's have him, then you have a go. Yeah.
No, go ahead. It'd be great to hear the response to this gentleman as well.
Yeah, no, I've used BlaBlaCar before, and I'd be curious what the counterfactual of the journeys are. Right? Are people using BlaBlaCar when there isn't a train available, or are they using it? It's cheaper? Mm-hmm.
There is no public transport available that way. So now actually he's formed like I mean, he's also cutting down his costs for his petrol, but also he's going there with someone who's reliably going to pay him for it.
Hi everyone, Jana, CEO of Kind Community. Love the conversation and the I guess your approach, Nicholas, to comparing a US-based tech company valuation versus like a UK transport solution. You're comparing apples to oranges here. I'm basically referencing a guest that we had on our sustainability show early on, and we've essentially built a system built around a fuel type, and the evolution of humanity has evolved around different fuel types, and going from wood to now petroleum, oil and gas based fuels. Like our entire system, our road networks are built around fossil fuels and the internal combustion engine. And I think a lot of us in the room are coming from a place of privilege and speaking about how we could hopefully, maybe we can afford electric vehicles, but that's not the answer. We've privatized our transport system here in the UK for profit, and what we really need is system change, and we really need to actually make decisions by being very inclusive in our decision-making process. A lot of our decision-makings at government, even in these tech companies, probably don't have a single representation from someone that needs different accessibility needs. So firstly, it's a mindset change for us as leaders to welcome in and collaborate with individuals that represent the communities that we're solving for. We're trying to solve this problem disjointly and without full representation. So we need people to be more welcoming to including those people, so we can make better decisions, and that comes from better leadership. And therefore, we will be able to create the solutions that will create a more harmonious and cleaner transport system. EVs, electric vehicles, scooters aren't the answer. It's part of the answer. Clean energy, national transport solutions are part of the answer. Mindset change into community-owned, car sharing if that's vehicle. But what isn't sexy is also fundraising for the transition period. For example, a representation of who we have in our community as someone that's created a hardware solution that basically cuts emissions by 50% of a combustion engine. You plug it in, anyone can do it here that's able, or you take it to your mechanic, takes 10 minutes to do, and your emissions are immediately 50% less. Because guess what? Not all of us can invest in an EV. There's billions of people with an combustion engine rather. So those sorts of headlines aren't sexy or attractive for us to go to VCs and raise a hell of a lot of money around a tech solution that actually cuts emissions, because we're too busy talking about electric vehicles. So I think, what I'm trying to round up here, and thanks for giving me the time to speak, is that we do need to be more inclusive in our decision making and welcome in and support those people that can actually help us create the ideas to create a solution. How are we doing this on this stage and within our leadership of the people in this room today?
I've just been warned we've only got 5 more minutes, so let's see if anybody else wants to say stuff. The quick rejoinder I'd just say on that, by the way, was the point I was trying to make is behavior change by everybody in this, people including this room, means that in the last 8 years, the point about my lift sharing point was that the gain from every single BEV fully electric car, 530,000 of them sold so far, has been entirely wiped out because people are riding alone. That's a simple thing. It's a behavior change thing. But regardless that, and I could do that for every mode of transport, and even for cars, I could go quite a few stages beyond it. If you don't get the behavior change, you can come up with whatever tech you want. Let's have this gentleman here, and then let's have 2 or 3 questions, and then let the panel deal with it. Yeah,
I'll be very quick. I have a question about urban form, perhaps for a friend from DOT, because I guess you have insight into the US market as well, but let's talk about like the shape that certain cities have versus other cities, and how certain cities have been built for the automobile in a certain historical era, and how we can deal with that from a public transportation view, and whether there is any data or any insight about actually slower journey is actually better for the economy because you're stopping on the way and sort of engaging with the local economy a lot more. I wonder if there's any thoughts on that.
then could we have this person here as well? Are there any more? Because then we can get 3 in together. And then somebody at the back, way at the back, is that right? Yeah, okay.
Yeah, so I just wanted to say I'm really excited that Renee is on this panel, and we've had already a discussion about disability within transport. And so one question I'd love to ask, and perhaps particularly to you, Dot, sorry, to Iqbal from Dot, my bad.
Iqbal. Mr. Dot.
Mr. Dot is there is a lot being said about this beautiful transition to last mile and journeys, whether that be with kind of shareable bikes, shareable e-scooters, etc. But one thing that isn't often talked about is the impact of that on wheelchair users who need to have a wide enough pavement to actually get around the city and access different spaces. And I know it's a difficulty here because you've got people who are effectively using these transport solutions who don't know about that issue and will leave them basically anywhere on a pavement. I'm really curious what both government and obviously providers like yourself could be doing to kind of enable the public to be empowered to kind of leave the vehicles in the right place so that we're not kind of making life more difficult for other people.
So let's, in fact, because I don't think we've got the microphone there yet. So let's just do these 2 first. You start it up with it and then see whichever bits you want to pick up on YouTube. Yeah. So you've got the 2 questions.
Yeah. So first a question. Yeah. So first a question about the urban form and urban planning. I think that's probably the most important determinant on how people move in the city, right? The modes you use are a reflection of the distance to where you want to go and how you want to get there, right? Like I grew up in rural Alaska, and over there, like you're not using a scooter, right? And that's a function of the environment which shaped the way the city's planned, right? But in other cities like London, London's interesting, and so is Chicago. I mean, DOT doesn't operate in North America, but I've knowledge is a lot of our transport systems are originally made to get mainly men from suburbs into urban cores for like banking jobs from 9 to 5 and then get them back out, right? These sort of in and out tidal journeys. And what you find is that, mainly women at the time and people who have more domestic jobs make more radial trips, right? Taking kids to school, taking someone to the doctor. And so I think what the micromobility or other from the transport are trying to do is fill that gap. Public transport's made historically as a reflection of this one need that society had. That's society's evolved and our transport system gets so fixed in place, hasn't, right? We have a Victorian system here and we're hoping that other technologies, investments in mass investments in mobility as a service can help kind of ease the transition away and make friction. I mean, the most stark example is probably Chicago, right? Chicago, everything comes pretty much to a point. And then further you go away from the point, the further apart these transport lines get, the harder it is to make those radial trips. We hope that bikes and scooters and car clubs can help fill those gaps. Which I think I answered your question there. And on the on parking or just user behavior generally, is a really important issue. It's something that we have to put a lot more thought into. I mean, my perfect network of micromobility vehicles is not free floating. You can't leave it wherever you want. You have to put it in one spot in a parking bay, the way that scooters in London's are parking bay based. But a lot of bikes, you can probably see a couple around here of a competitor. You can leave them wherever you want, right? And so that's bad from a user experience, because, well, I mean, it's good in some user experience, but it's bad when you want to find one because you don't know where you want to go. It's bad operationally because we're stuck driving around trying to figure out where these bikes are, how to bring them in or do battery swaps. And it's really bad for people who need the pavement because they don't know where to expect these vehicles. To me, it's always about putting it on the pavement, take a car parking spot out and make that a parking location. That's ideal. I mean, it's difficult in a city like London because you're dealing with all these boroughs. They make a lot of money off cars parking. Parking on residential streets becomes very political. But put it on the carriageway, make it dedicated parking. And then, I mean, that's the ideal, but until we get there, for us, it's user sanctions, right? Make people pay fines, give them warnings, ban it from our service. And it's also about building norms. Like right now, people know not to drive their motorcycle on the sidewalk or on the pavement. That's a norm that's developed over a long period of time. Our industry is still very new, and it's really on us as the industry to try to instill those norms. And how do you do that? And that's through incentives, that's through messaging, that's through education. But yeah, really important point, definitely point taken.
I'd just like to add to that beautiful questions you asked. In fact, CityMass was helping one of your competitors to sort of make sure that the operational side is not impacting the local communities, not just people wheelchair users, but also parents with push prams, and you don't want to swing into busy roads and avoid the parking of scooters or bikes. And I think there are many things. The technologies and innovation is a fantastic thing. But only if your starting point of that innovations and technologies starting right at the beginning, design inclusively and well thought out, that's when you don't deviate and solve the problem along the way. Because I think dark systems is what I would think ideal sort of sharing mobility would help. But again, there is a different pulling forces in terms of your usabilities and finding all of these questions obstacles you just mentioned can be solved. It can be solved with innovation. It can be solved with technology. It can be solved with clever design. It's just a matter of like when you're making when you're making product and services right at the beginning, how do you design it? How do you make sure it's inclusive? How do you make sure that the impact, what you're trying to create, i.e. sustainability, reduce carbons, providing user experience from A to B for everybody, all of these questions are considered and discussed at the beginning when you are designing your products and services. That's when you don't, encounter obstacles later on. And I think that goes to like public sector's decision-making process, like that gentleman just said right at the beginning.
Sylvia, you're going to be the last person on the mic, so answer whichever you think, and also you'll be the last person to speak if you want to say anything. I won't be the last. We've run out of time. So whichever your best fit, but also if you've got any bigger point you want to make, and that'll be it. We've run out of
Okay,
time.
no, just two very quick points with the gentleman at the back. I think there were two words that stood out for me in the question you asked. One was behavior change and culture change. I think that's very important in the UK. It's a major barrier, I think, to car sharing, to so many other sorts of mobility issues we're trying to solve. Just as an example, when I'm taking the kids to birthday parties, I always have to ask the other moms, oh, can anyone give us a ride? You know, otherwise I need to create a journey and, you know, get a taxi, but no one knows to ask. You know, that's a sort of cultural sort of decision and change that we need to be encouraging, perhaps through more local campaigns and local authorities. And the second word is leadership. We need political leadership in this space at the national level, at the local level. None of this will happen unless local politicians and central government are actually frank with people about what it will take to decarbonize transport, the behavior change that we need. And at the moment, the government is frightened of, you know, being seen as creating a war on motorists, but there are politicians that are approaching this problem in a good way. Like if we're looking at Wales, if we're looking at some of the city mayors that we've got in Manchester, in London, and other places, there are ways you can communicate about this without being confrontational.
That brings it to an end. Thank you very much. You can all take a break.